What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Raids, and I'm back on the channel bringing you some more of the finals news. Now, today's video, we're going to be discussing the patch notes that have just gone live. This is going to be for the patch on the 20th of December 2023, and we'll be having a look as to what has been nerfed, what has been buffed, what has been just overall kind of tweaked, and my god, if you are a heavy main, you want to see this. This is insane as to how much you've potentially been gutted when it comes to some of your main and top tier picks. Now, of course, if you do enjoy this type of video and you want to see more from ourselves when it comes to the finals, make sure to drop that like and subscribe so you can find your way back to the channel for more. But with all that said and done, what are we waiting for? Let's start diving right into it. So we're going to be reading from the top all the way down to the bottom when it comes to this patch note, and I'll explain a couple of my personal opinions as to how it's kind of going to affect or shape the landscape when it comes to ranked or for casual, or how I've also managed to, because I've done a little bit of testing as well inside the practice arena, just to give you an idea as to what this is actually going to affect. So going from the top, we do have the abilities section. We've got 3 abilities that we need to have a look at, and one of which is going to be the goo gun. Now, this is a fairly simple fix for right here, but it's fixed an issue where goo could block the player. We're going to see something like very similar a little bit further on down in the list, but this was really, really good because I've managed to use the goo grenade, I've managed to use the goo gun in some capacity, and I've managed to get myself stuck in a couple of situations, and it's just not a great feeling. It means you have to start shooting the goo to be able to free yourself. Obviously, it's then going to create a tension as to where you currently are. It just basically makes you a sitting duck. It's just not great whatsoever. So I'm glad that they've managed to identify that, and I'm glad they've managed to fix that. Next up, we have the Mesh Shield. So the Mesh Shield, which was pretty much the top tier pick when it comes to heavy class. This was the perfect teammate covering ability. This allowed you to be able to have your teammates shoot through the shield, and they would be in relatively good safety from you being able to have your shield up. Now, this thing used to feel impenetrable at times because it did have 1,250 health, but this has been reduced all the way down to 1,100, so we've lost an extra light class version of health from that shield. So it does mean that these are going to start breaking a little bit sooner. You're going to have a bit more kind of management. You're going to have a bit more knowledge, a bit more game sense around you as to when to be able to pop this up and when to be able to take it down. So the Mesh Shield, quite rightly so, has had a bit of a change, but it doesn't feel like it's going to start, like, just disappear or anything like that. It doesn't feel like this ability is just going to disappear from like the top tier of ranked. I do think that it's going to be easy to be able to play around, but in the same respect, it's still going to be a great ability and probably still the top tier pick for the heavy class. Next up, we have the Recon Senses for the medium class, where Recon Senses activation cost has been reduced from 2 all the way down to 1. So this is going to be a big change in that sense, as in like you're going to be able to use this and be able to pop this a little bit more often. But in all honesty, I don't see the point. I don't see it taking over like the top tier when it comes to like Medigun or anything like that. I still think that Turret is probably still going to be a better option as well. But it's nice to be able to see that it has had a buff. I think it needs a couple more changes before we start to see this kind of like eke its way into that kind of like ranked side of things. But the Recon Senses, as it currently stands, is probably the worst ability that the medium class does have. But it's nice to see that it is starting to get some love. Next up, we get into the gadgets section, and my god, if you are a heavy player, this is going to be one of the biggest things that's going to be upsetting you, especially when it comes to C4. C4 has now had a massive change. It's had a bit of an overhaul, but what this has done is the max player damage has been reduced down from 240 all the way down to 210. We've had the max damage radius reduced from 2.4 meters down to 1.6 meters, which is kind of crazy. And we've also had the self-damage multiplier increased from 1 all the way up to 1.3. What this means is that you're going to be dealing less damage more reliably to enemies, but you're actually going to be dealing more damage to yourself if you do manage to catch yourself inside that explosion radius, to the point of view that you'll start worrying about if you're actually going to instantly kill yourself. Now, being able to go down to 210 is, you know, it's all right. It means that you know, you're still going to be doing a buttload of damage with this ability. It's still going to be a very effective tool. It's still going to be amazing for destruction. It's still going to be planted on top of like bottles and chockables and everything like that to be able to still do damage and probably wipe some teams. But it means that if you use this against a medium class, if you use this against a heavy, they're going to like just standard, just straight up, they're going to have a bit more health for them to be able to fight you back. But, you know, it's 30 health, it is what it is. The main thing that is probably going to be quite big on this, and that I'm expecting anyway, is going to be that max damage radius. So if you do plant this over a cash out point or anything like that, and you're using it as like a surprise, as a trap, as a tactic in that sense, you're going to have to be a bit more accurate with this to be able to maximize that amount of damage, because outside of 1.6 meters, your damage is going to start falling off, and then you're just going to be dealing even less damage. So it's still going to be good for destruction, but it's just going to be doing less damage to players, and I think that's a little bit more balanced in its kind of capacity. Next up we have the Dome Shield, and this once again was going to be a top tier pick for heavies, and I still think it is, but with the change what has happened is instead of being 350 health, it's dropped all the way down to 300. Being able to have that 50 HP was just a couple of extra bullets depending on which gun you were using to be able to go into it. So I don't think it's a huge change. I don't think it's going to be to the point of it's just going to be trash or anything like that. I still think the Dome Shield is especially strong, and there's not really much that can actually do what the Dome Shield is able to do in this game. So I do think that one pretty much is still going to be top tier, but it's just a little bit easier to be able to start breaking. Next up we have all the changes to the mines. Now we've got a change to the gas, the glitch, we've got the explosive, and we've got the pyro, and every single one of these has now added an arming time, meaning that they have to be stationary, they have to be on a surface for 1.6 seconds after throwing, until they then arm, and then they're ready to be able to go. I think this is an amazing change because there wasn't much that kind of differentiated apart from the throwing, like how far you could throw an item and everything like that. There wasn't much that differentiated the mine between the grenades, because the mine just essentially had a bit more utility when it came to it, because you were able to put it down on a location. It was essentially something waiting for an enemy to be able to come onto it, rather than something like a frag grenade, which only has a certain amount of time before it then detonates, and it was just able to throw further. So I'm glad to see that this is going to be implemented. It means that we can't necessarily just chuck down a mine afterward, like just as soon as we're about to die or anything like that. And I believe you also need to be able to wait that 1.6 seconds before you shoot it, before then it can activate and then go into like a gas cloud or something like that. So there is a few things that we do need to be able to play around. There's a few things we need to be able to mess about and to just keep in the back of our minds when it comes to that, but I'm glad to see that change for the mines. On top of that, we've also had an additional change to the explosive mine, meaning that max player damage has now been reduced from 160 to 140. So I can already hear the light players and the light mains already screaming out, going, yes, this is the best change ever. And that's good, because this means that we won't instantly get killed by an explosive mine, which is great. It gives us a chance to be able to back out of there. It gives us a chance of being able to start healing up. And on top of that, we've also had the mine damage radius reduced from 4 meters down to 3.5. So we're going to start seeing less damage, or less residual damage to teammates as well, and less chance of that being able to happen. So obviously the person that's setting off the mine is still going to receive the majority of that damage, but any of the teammates that were also next to them and everything, it's going to be much easier for them to be able to dodge that. So that's going to be great. I think this is a great change, and I can't wait to be able to see how this kind of works when we get into casual and get into ranked. Speaking of grenades, though, we do also have a change to the goo grenade. That's the only one that's pretty much been fixed here, but we fixed an issue similar to like the goo gun, where the goo could block the player. I've already covered that, but essentially that's just something that exists there. The last but one gadget that we need to look at is going to be the RPG-7, and if you were a main with this, then by God, this is going to be so much harder to be able to use, especially in the way you were currently using it anyway. But the max player damage has been reduced from 165 down to 150. While that doesn't sound like a lot, we'll get into why that's a big factor shortly. Min player damage has been reduced from 90 down to 80, so anyone caught in the edge of this radius is going to receive a minimum of 80 instead of 90. A little bit of a change, but you know, it's still pretty good. Damage radius has been reduced from 4.75 meters to 4.5 meters, so you're going to need to be a little bit more accurate. And speaking of accuracy with this, max damage radius has been reduced from 2.5 meters down to 1.5 meters. This is going to be huge, and I do think that this is going to be the biggest buff to the light class that probably exists on this list right now. The reason why is because before the RPG-7 was able to instantly delete a light class that existed on the field, with relative ease at the end of the day, because you were able to have that 165, so you still had 15 points of damage to be able to mess about with outside of that 2.5 meter radius. So it was a pretty big radius in being able to land this rocket, and on top of that it extended even further on that because you also had some damage to be able to mess about with. Well, now that's not the case, because you have to be pinpoint accurate with this one pretty much, to the point of 1.5 meter radius to be able to deal that maximum 150, and anything outside of that is going to take reduced damage, meaning that those light classes are going to start surviving. If you pair this up with the other two lines of text that exist here, where aim down sights dispersion as well as hipfire dispersion have both increased slightly, this means that the RPG-7 is going to be a little less controllable. It means that you're not able to just use this as like a sniper rifle from distance or anything like that. You're going to have to factor in that it does have some slight inaccuracy to it, similar to like that of something like if you were playing Call of Duty, for example, or like Battlefield titles or something like that. The RPG-7 had a slight chance, like deviation from where you were originally aiming, because that's how the rocket launcher behaves. Well, now it's kind of like falling more in line with that, so you kind of have to use the RPG-7 a little bit closer up to be able to minimize the amount of like dispersion that's now going to have. Overall, I love this change, especially as someone that really enjoys playing as a light class. I genuinely thought that the RPG-7 was just kind of oppressive in its state before this, so I'd be happy to see how this one's going to start playing out, and just see if we're going to see more light classes start eking their way into ranked as well as casual play. Lastly, we do have a change to the stun gun, and it baffles me as to why this exists on here, because I don't think anyone was calling for a change or a buff to the stun gun, not in this capacity anyway. But we've increased the stun gun range from 10 meters all the way up to 12 meters, so you have an additional 2 meters to be able to mess about with. As a light class, you didn't really need to worry about that, because this was pretty much used within like 5 meters, and I don't think anyone really went, oh, well, the range on the stun gun doesn't feel great, but it is there, it is a change, so overall, it's a nice little buff, and means people start using it a little bit more. Next category we have is going to go to the map, so we've just got a couple of things or a couple of lines on this. So we've added the game show events, we've added a repulsor to the flying saucers in the alien invasion event. Can't wait to see how that's going to behave. I can't wait to see how that's... I've only had this pop once, maybe twice, and it's really a spectacle to behold when it goes go. But I would love to be able to see what that's going to be like in terms of like a change. Vegas, we've updated the strain in various buildings to give better destruction results. Perfect. I absolutely love Vegas, and I'm glad to see that we're going to start seeing some better destruction. And we've also resolved an issue where cash out stations would become invisible before players finish the transfer. Overall, great quality of life things, and I'm glad to see that's getting implemented. In terms of modes, we have one thing that's been changed. In Bankit, we've got a disallowed deathmatch game show event from occurring in Bankit game mode. The game mode was technically treated as deathmatch anyway, at least in my opinion. I'm not entirely sure if anyone else agrees on that. But essentially, with this one, you were already planning on killing people to be able to get their cash. So they've disabled it so you get even more cash on that if it did actually proc. So that's probably a good choice. I'm glad to see that's actually gone in. Next up, they give us a section when it comes to weapons, and like I said, I've only done a couple of quick minutes of testing on this one, but I haven't tested everything. But what we have seen is that the AKM has had a slight adjustment to its recoil pattern. It doesn't say if it's better or if it's worse. So obviously I'll jump into that. I'll get an idea as to if that's better or worse, just to see if it brings it closer to that of the FCAR or if it pushes it even further away, being able to use it in much closer range in that case if it's a much worse recoil pattern. So we'll have a look as to that one. We'll do a deep dive into that. When it comes to the flamethrower fire rate has been increased from 160 to 170, which is a weird change of anything to go for the flamethrower. If anything, it needs a damage increase, but hey-oh, they've decided to go for a 10 round per minute increase on the flamethrower, and it still makes it the worst gun to be able to use, so you still want to avoid this one. The LH1, the damage is increased from 45 to 47. I honestly cannot find a reason as to why this would actually ever need this, but I have messed about with a couple of formulas to see if maybe it's a case that it's damage range. Well, I guess we'll find that out over time, but as it currently stands, in terms of what it says it does on paper, no idea what the point of this one was. In terms of melee weapons, we've fixed an issue as a whole where melees didn't always connect with enemy players. Pretty good, so that's a nice quality of life change for every single one of those melee weapons, which is great to see. The M11 has had its damage increase from 15 to 16. I do think this is going to be a good choice because the amount of bullets that it does take, and obviously that's base damage before it goes into headshots, I do think that's a good call for the M11, and I do think that will reduce it by maybe 1 to maybe even 2 points to kill. So I do think that's great. The last but one, we've got the riot shield, where we fixed a bug where the shield would block bullets while invisible during interactions and reviving stealing extractions. I can see why this would be a frustrating thing to be able to witness, especially if you are the one shooting. I can't say that I've witnessed it myself in terms of my own gameplay or anything like that, but I suppose anything that's technically a nerf to the riot shield is just basically kicking it while it's down. But I suppose if it makes it feel a bit more consistent in terms of game, then obviously that's something that needs doing. The SA1216, the king of all guns, has had a pellet dispersion increase slightly, and also had its damage per pellet reduced from 8 to 7. Now, with this one, it sounds worse than it actually is. It's still able to 2-shot light classes, it's still able to 3-shot mediums, and it's still able to 4-shot heavies. The main thing that this is actually going to change now is that it kind of works out similar to like a range issue now. To the point of you have to pretty much be up close with this gun to be able to get the most out of it. Having a reduction in damage and also meaning that your pellets are going to be more spread out means that you're going to have to start maximizing. You're still going to be consistent within like 10 meters. We're still within like 8 to 10 meters. But as soon as you start pushing the ranges out and everything like that, the SA1216 definitely falls off a little bit. So it is a bit of a good change in that sense, because the SA1216 was already crazy. But obviously it does mean that people are probably going to start gravitating more towards the LMGs now, because the 1216 is starting to get seen in terms of like the devs' eyes as being oppressive. Last few things for us to be able to cover is going to be to do with movement. We've had the vaulting, where it reduces instances when you unintentionally climbed on objects outside of the player's view, and fixed an issue where players could get stuck without being able to give input. Great choices right there. And then we've also had the zip lines, the prevented placement of zip lines on pick-uppables. I'm glad to see this one done. As hilarious and as fun as this was, being able to put this on an item and then fly around the map, if you haven't seen the clips, I would highly recommend that you go out and search these. But it was hilarious to be able to witness these, but it was just broken. It shouldn't have behaved the way it currently does, and I'm glad to see that they've picked up on that. And then lastly, we do have the UI section, where various fixes to contestant screens, polished to the social screen, which now hides the invite to party button when you're not the party leader, added a warning to the UI that appears when players are in danger of being AFK kicked, player health bars now use the squad colour when selected in the settings, and lastly, UI shows you as unranked unless you're among the top 500 on the leaderboards. So there you go, that wraps up everything to do with the patch notes that have gone through on the 20th of December. Let me know your favourite ones down in the comment section down below. What are your concerns when it comes to, do you think they've done enough to be able to go for the SA1216? Do they need to be able to buff the LH1 a little bit more? Let me know everything that you possibly think. Let me know what your changes, what your proposed changes would be down in the comment section below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help channel out. And of course, if you did enjoy, make sure to drop that like and subscribe so you can find your way back to the channel for more. With all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.